The night air was thick with tension as Officer Grant stormed out of his patrol car, his boots hitting the pavement with authority. The dim glow of a flickering streetlight cast long shadows on the cracked sidewalk, where a man in a dark suit stood calmly, his hands resting at his sides. Grant didn't bother asking questions. He never did. Instead, his voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "What do you think you're doing here?" he snapped, his tone laced with suspicion. The man barely flinched. His expression remained composed, unreadable. "Just taking a walk," he replied evenly. Grant didn't like that answer. He didn't like the confidence, the ease in the stranger's voice. To him, it sounded like defiance. And defiance wasn't something he tolerated. Without another word, he shoved the man's shoulder, forcing him back a step. The stranger lifted his hands slightly, not in fear, but as if trying to defuse the situation. "Look, officer, there's no need for..." Before he could finish, Grant's fist connected with his jaw. A heavy silence followed as the man staggered but didn't fall. He touched his lip, checking for blood, his eyes flashing with something unreadable. A slow smirk crept across his face as he met Grant's furious gaze. "You really should be careful who you put your hands on," he said, his voice lower now, carrying weight. Grant scoffed. "Oh yeah? And who exactly do you think you are?" The stranger took a step forward, straightening his jacket, before pulling out his badge. He held it up just enough for the streetlight to catch the gleaming gold lettering. "Captain Marcus Reynolds, your new commanding officer." The color drained from Grant's face, and just like that, the power dynamic shifted in an instant. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic. Officer Grant stood frozen, his mind racing to process what had just happened. His chest tightened as his eyes flicked between the badge and the man holding it. No way. This had to be a joke. His new captain. Grant swallowed hard, but his pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. "Nice trick," he scoffed, forcing a smirk. "Anybody can flash a badge. Doesn't mean it's real." Captain Reynolds didn't look amused. He took a slow step closer, his presence steady, unshaken. "You want to call it in?" he asked. "Go ahead. Let dispatch confirm it." Grant hesitated. His fingers twitched toward his radio. But deep down, he already knew the truth. The confidence in Reynolds' voice, the way he carried himself, it wasn't an act. This man had authority, real authority. And Grant had just made the worst mistake of his career. The captain let the silence hang between them before speaking again, his tone calm but firm. "You like throwing your weight around, don't you, Officer Grant?" His eyes locked onto him, unblinking. "How often do you do this?" Grant clenched his jaw. "I don't know what you're talking about." A small, knowing nod from Reynolds. "Right," he said. "So you're telling me I'm the first guy you've decided to rough up for no reason?" Grant's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He felt exposed, like Reynolds could see right through him. "I was just doing my job," he muttered, his voice lacking the confidence it held earlier. Reynolds studied him, his face unreadable. "Is that what you tell yourself?" Grant looked away, his pulse hammering. He could feel the walls closing in. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken words. Grant could feel his pulse pounding in his neck, but he wasn't about to let this man, this stranger, break him down. His mind raced for a way out of this situation, but no excuse would erase what had just happened. The only question now was how bad the fallout would be. Reynolds finally exhaled, glancing down the empty street before turning his eyes back to Grant. "You've got a choice to make," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. "We can handle this here, right now, or I can take this straight to the chief. What's it gonna be?" Grant shifted his weight, his jaw tight. He wanted to snap back, to regain control, but deep down, he knew there was no talking his way out of this. Still, surrender didn't come easy for a man like him. Before he could respond, the radio on his shoulder crackled to life. "Unit 47, report status." Grant hesitated. Reynolds didn't move, just watched him, waiting. A test. Grant knew it. If he ignored the call, it would only make things worse. He swallowed, pressing the button. "All clear," he said, his voice steady. Reynolds nodded slightly, like he expected nothing less. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. "You've been on the force for what, 7 years?" Grant stiffened. "Yeah." "Long time," Reynolds said, flipping through the pages. "Long enough to build habits." His eyes lifted from the notebook, pinning Grant with a stare. "You ever stop to think what happens when those habits catch up to you?" Grant's throat tightened. He didn't like where this was going. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the night. "Captain." Both men turned. A younger officer stood a few feet away, his wide eyes darting between them. His name tag read Dawson, a rookie Grant had never paid much attention to. Dawson looked uneasy. "Is everything all right?" Reynolds smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That depends," he said. "What do you think, Officer Grant?" Grant's fingers twitched at his sides. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Whatever came next, he knew one thing: Reynolds wasn't just passing through. He was here to stay, and he was watching. Grant felt a cold sweat forming at the back of his neck, but he kept his expression blank. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not in front of Dawson, not in front of Reynolds. The captain's words still hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. He was watching, and that meant this wasn't going to disappear. Dawson shifted uneasily, glancing between them. "I was just checking in," he said carefully. "Heard the radio. Thought maybe." "You thought maybe what?" Grant snapped, the pressure getting to him. He immediately regretted it. The rookie took a half step back, eyes wide. Reynolds, however, didn't even flinch. "That's enough," Reynolds said, his voice calm but firm. "Officer Dawson, you're dismissed." Dawson hesitated, his gaze flickering to Grant, then back to Reynolds. He nodded quickly before stepping away, disappearing into the patrol car parked nearby. The distant hum of its engine was the only sound as Reynolds turned back to Grant. "You've built a reputation," Reynolds said, his tone unreadable. "One that goes beyond just being tough on the job." Grant exhaled sharply. "I do what's necessary." Reynolds tilted his head slightly. "Necessary for who?" Grant clenched his jaw. He didn't have an answer, not one that would hold up under the weight of the moment. Reynolds took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You know how this goes. The things you've done, the way you operate, it doesn't stay buried forever. People talk. Reports stack up." He tapped his notebook. "And I listen." Grant's stomach twisted. He wasn't stupid. He knew there had been complaints over the years, whispers in the precinct, but nothing had ever stuck. The system had always worked in his favor. Until now. Reynolds studied him for a long beat before finally speaking again. "I'm giving you a chance," he said, "but I need to know something." Grant swallowed hard. "What?" Reynolds' next words were slow, deliberate. "If I dig deeper, what else am I going to find?" A sharp chill ran through Grant. He'd opened his mouth, but no words came, because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he had anywhere left to run. Grant's throat felt dry. The weight of Reynolds' question pressed down on him, each second stretching uncomfortably. He wanted to snap back, to regain control, but for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had any left. Before he could respond, the radio crackled again. "All units, report to 5th and Elm. Possible officer down. Suspect armed." Grant's heart jumped. That was close, just a few blocks away. His instincts kicked in. Whatever was happening between him and Reynolds would have to wait. Reynolds studied him for a second longer before grabbing his own radio. Captain Reynolds responding, en route. He turned to Grant, his voice calm but direct. "Let's go." Grant hesitated for half a second before nodding, grateful for the distraction. He rushed to his cruiser, sliding behind the wheel, but the uneasy feeling in his gut didn't go away. As he sped toward the scene, the city lights flashing past, his mind raced. Officer down. That wasn't something you ignored, but there was something else gnawing at him. The way Reynolds had looked at him, like he already knew the answer to the question he had asked, like he was just waiting for Grant to realize it himself. When they arrived, the street was chaos. Squad cars lined the block, red and blue lights painting the buildings. Officers moved with urgency, their radios buzzing with chatter. Then Grant saw him, Dawson. He was on the ground, gripping his shoulder, blood staining his uniform. Grant's stomach dropped. Reynolds was already moving, barking orders. "Where's the suspect?" "Ran into the alley," an officer called out. Grant barely heard him, his eyes locked onto Dawson, who was looking right at him, his face twisted in pain. But there was something else there too, something Grant couldn't ignore. Fear. And that's when it hit him. Dawson wasn't just looking at him. He was looking asterisk for asterisk him. Like he already knew who had done this. Grant's breath caught in his chest. The way Dawson looked at him, it wasn't just fear. It was recognition. His pulse hammered as he stepped forward, but Reynolds grabbed his arm. "Stay back," the captain warned. "Let the medics handle him." Grant barely heard him. His mind was spinning. Dawson knew something, and whatever it was, it had just changed everything. Before he could speak, another officer shouted from the alley, "Suspect's gone. Must have had a getaway car." Reynolds turned sharply. Did anyone see anything? Silence. Frustration flickered across his face. Then, without looking at Grant, he muttered, "Convenient." Grant stiffened. He wasn't sure if that was directed at him, but it felt like it was. And for the first time, he felt truly trapped. Dawson groaned, shifting slightly on the ground. Grant took another step, his voice low. "Who did this?" Dawson's breathing was shallow, his face pale, but his eyes flickered toward him again. "I tried to stop it," he whispered. Grant's chest tightened. "Stop what?" But before Dawson could answer, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Grant." He turned and his stomach dropped. Standing near the squad cars was a man he never thought he'd see again. A man he had once trusted. A man who knew every secret he had tried to bury. Detective Cole. Grant's throat tightened as the older officer walked toward him, his face unreadable. "Long time," Cole said. "Didn't think I'd see you again, after everything." Reynolds' eyes flickered between them, sensing the shift. "You two know each other?" Grant couldn't speak. Cole smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Oh yeah," he said. "Me and Grant. We go way back." Grant felt the ground shift beneath him, because if Cole was here, then the past he had spent years running from had finally caught up, and there was no escaping it this time. Grant's mouth was dry. The weight of Cole's presence felt suffocating. He had spent years making sure their paths never crossed again, yet here he was, standing just feet away, holding all the history Grant wanted to forget. Reynolds studied them both, his sharp gaze missing nothing. "Someone want to explain what's going on?" Dawson groaned from the ground, struggling to speak. "The alley. I saw." His voice trailed off, his strength fading. The paramedics were already working on him, but Grant knew he didn't have much time before the rookie told them everything. Cole took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough for only Grant to hear. "You think this was random," he said, his tone cold. "Someone's cleaning up loose ends, and I'd say you're next on the list." Grant's stomach twisted. He had been in the game long enough to know when things were bigger than they seemed. This wasn't just about him roughing up the wrong guy. Someone was pulling the strings. And now it was clear he wasn't in control anymore. Reynolds turned to Cole. "If you've got information, now's the time to share." Cole smirked. "Oh, I have plenty." Then he glanced back at Grant. "But I think your officer here already knows most of it." Grant felt his hands clench into fists, but for the first time, he didn't have a way out. Reynolds exhaled, shaking his head. "We'll talk at the station." He turned toward Grant. "And you're coming with me." Grant didn't argue. He couldn't. As he followed Reynolds toward the cruiser, he took one last look at the alley, at Dawson, at the flashing lights. He had spent years bending the rules, thinking he'd never face consequences. But tonight, everything changed.